unfortunately, because of the pandemic and because of maybe some mismanagement with a lot of these reverse mortgage companies, these properties have been sitting since 1920, 21. The people have died several years ago, and these properties have been sitting for a long time.
Yeah.
And they've been paying the taxes, and they're probably not going to get their amount of money that they've put into them, but you can clean up these properties and you can get them back onto the tax rolls and get some new people in there, whether it's renters or owners. And there's a lot of investors out there looking to gobble up these properties.
You're listening to the Real Returns podcast, where we learn how real investments can make a real impact. Join your hosts, Andrew and Dan, as they share stories and interview business leaders on how real estate and other forms of investment can create meaningful change for individuals and communities around the world.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Real Returns podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about real estate and investing and the impact it can have on people's lives. I am joined in person here with Kim Bodnar. She's an attorney. She works a lot in estate planning. Kim, would you mind introducing yourself to the team?
Certainly. I'm an attorney. My office is in downtown Pittsburgh, my physical office, but I'm also licensed in Florida. So my physical presence is all over the state of Pennsylvania, as well as all over the state of Florida.
Love it. And can you tell me a little bit about the kind of work that you do? I know you're an attorney. You do some estate planning work. What does that look like?
Well, I've been practicing for over 30 years, and I have done quite a few things in my career. I started out doing a lot of litigation, and I would get an award for one of my clients, and perhaps they were disabled, so they couldn't go back to work. So they'd say, well, let me set up a small business, or let me make sure that I can give some of the funds that I have to my children if something happens to me. So we do estate planning. And then when the inevitable happens, I assist with the estate administration. I call myself a whole life attorney. I'm cradle to grave, essentially, because during the lifetime of my clients, they then come back to me and say, well, Junior got in trouble with a DUI, or perhaps Junior wants to divorce his spouse, and I can certainly handle those things. But at this stage of my career, my main focus is either litigation, estate planning, or estate administration.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I'm so excited that you're on the show here because I feel like particularly in today's day and age, we all have a tendency to just think about the here and now. We all have a tendency to manage our affairs for the current events. But I think it's so important to have that forward-looking view. One of the things we talk about in our company is, hey, what's going to happen when we are no longer here, when I'm no longer here as a person? How do I want to be remembered? It's one of the things that we really encourage our teammates to think about. So I'm curious, how do you encourage your clients to think about, hey, when you're no longer here, what are the things that they should be thinking about with their assets?
Well, usually my clients have a main asset. That main asset could be their real estate. That main asset could be their business. So there's a very specific area of law that talks about transitioning your business from yourself to your either to your heirs, or potentially selling off your business and using those proceeds for the rest of your life. But again, in Pittsburgh, many of the folks here, again, their main asset is their real estate. They may have more than one piece of real estate. And what I try to encourage my clients to do is to, as soon as possible, decide who they would like their real estate to go to. If they have the plan that they're going to live in their house forever, which is most people's plan, they love their homes, they don't want to leave, they love their neighborhoods, they still want to make sure that they're not leaving extra steps for their children to do after they're gone. So one of the things I encourage them to do is to provide me a copy of their deed. And that's usually a document that is recorded in the Recorder of Deeds in every county in Pennsylvania and every county in Florida. And that deed shows who owns the property. And a lot of times the deed says the property is owned individually, or that it's owned by husband and wife or spouses, and by tenants by the entirety. So if they give me their deed and they say, okay, I've got 3 children, I want to put all 3 children on my deed, there's several different conversations that we can have so that we know what makes the most sense, how to add their children to their deed, when to add their children to the deed, when to file the deed. Because to give you some context, if you have a single mother who has been living in her house, her husband predeceased her, she owns her house, she's getting in Pennsylvania quite often a homestead exemption. So what makes sense is for her to stay in her home and pay her taxes and get her homestead exemption, but she wants to give the property to her children. We would do a deed now, but we wouldn't record it necessarily until after she passes because she's still living in the house. She doesn't want to give the responsibility of the taxes to her children who are not living there.
Right.
So again, that's one way that her status quo stays the same, but she's alleviated all of the issues that come to pass when someone passes away. What do you do with the property?
Yeah.
It's already transferred to the children. Then the children can decide, are they going to move into the property or are the children just going to turn around and sell it at that point? They're already the owners. They can hold on to it. They can turn it over.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I really love the reassurance that folks oftentimes when they get to the point where they're getting ready to do some end of life planning, that their home or their real estate is one of their biggest assets, if not the biggest asset. It's something I always encourage people, just the benefit of investing in real estate and having home ownership in particular is just a great way to protect that net worth and build that net worth through the years. And the last thing that you want is you get to the end of your life and you've done some bad planning around that one asset that is your leave behind for your children. And I love how you've thought through, particularly the deed to that asset, how to protect that and how to have that transfer to the children. You know, one of the things that came to mind, I know a lot of people are worried about things like transfer taxes and the death taxes, things like that. I've got to think that some of the planning that you do takes into account those taxes. Is that true?
Absolutely. One of the biggest things is that you want to avoid transfer taxes.
Sure.
You want to avoid inheritance taxes if you at all possibly can. Right now, Pennsylvania law is potentially going to change, but right now it's tiered. A spouse does not pay any inheritance taxes when a spouse inherits from the other spouse. A child under 18 does not pay any inheritance tax. But if a regular child over the age of 18 inherits something from their parents, whether it's real estate or whether it's money, they do have to pay right now 4.5%. And if it's a sibling, it's a higher rate. And if it's a collateral heir, like a niece or a nephew, it's even higher.
Wow.
So right now it's at 15%.
Okay.
So again, if you can transfer your asset to, especially your real estate asset, if you can transfer that out of your name completely at least a year before you pass away, you can avoid all of those taxes because transfers made within a year of death are still subject to those taxes.
Oh, okay.
So again, one of the other things that you brought up was transfer taxes. Transfer taxes are taxes that have to be paid when someone purchases a piece of property. You have to pay them to the state. You have to pay them to the local municipality. Again, there are various exemptions to transfer taxes because let's say you told me before the podcast that you have 3 girls. And let's say that you wanted to put your 3 girls on to your home that you own. There's an exemption that you could say that this is a transfer from a parent to a child for either natural love and affection or $1 or $10. And there's an exemption to transfer taxes.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Where you run into transfer taxes is when you're going from usually someone outside of your family. However, again, there's lots of different little exemptions that we make sure we incorporate into the deed language itself, because you want that all over there, that they're not going to come back and say, oh, well, you owe some transfer taxes after the fact, and then there's a lien on your property for those taxes.
Right, yeah.
Or there's a lien on your property for inheritance taxes if you didn't pay your inheritance taxes. Because that is another big thing in Pennsylvania, is you have to basically tell the state whether or not you're going to be paying inheritance taxes.
Oh, okay.
And the inheritance taxes are based off of all of the wealth that passes when you die. If you're able to get those assets to pass well before your death, then they're not part of the inheritance tax calculation. Because what happens is, by operation of law, when you pass, a lot of your assets, such as, let's say you have a bank account, and you put, and this is another thing that we talk about with my clients, is you want to make sure you've got beneficiary designations on everything. Because, just to give you an example, if I have a checking account, I'm probably going to outlive my father. My father is going to be 86 next month. And so I would make my asset in trust for my father. So if something happens to me, he gets everything. But guess what? He's got to pay inheritance tax on it. Because the triggering thing is, I passed away.
Right.
He has to pay inheritance tax on whatever he gets. So if in fact we can do something on the other end, is, let's say, what I tell my clients is not to do. I don't want to add my father to my checking account as a joint owner. Because if he passes away, I'm then paying inheritance tax on money that was mine to begin with.
Yeah,
so you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So when I offer my estate planning services with anyone, I give them a questionnaire. I tell them, okay, tell me about all of your assets. Tell me about how everything is titled.
Yeah.
Tell me what you want to happen to these things. Make sure you have beneficiary designations. And another thing that I always tell clients is, do not put down my estate is my beneficiary, because you're basically avoiding or you're missing the benefit of having a beneficiary designation, because you want it by operation of law to go directly to someone. If you're saying it goes to my estate, we got to open up an estate.
Yeah.
And not only do we have to do all of the documentation to transfer the title after you've passed, but now, in addition to the inheritance tax we've already talked about, there's also something called an inventory, which has to be filed in each county, that says, this is the value of all of the assets that transferred when I died. And guess what? The county wants a little piece of money based on that transfer too.
Yeah.
So again, we like to try to do everything properly so that we can avoid the taxes.
Sure.
We can avoid the aggravation. We can basically minimize the steps necessary to get a proper transfer.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. That's super helpful, very practical. A lot of our listeners have high net worth. They're investing in lots of things. So those are some really good practical ways that they can be thinking about preserving those assets that they've built for their entire lifetime. So thank you for sharing some of that wisdom. Let's talk about the mortgage side of things. I know a lot of times people probably get to the end of their life and maybe they own that house outright. So maybe there's not a mortgage. If there is a mortgage, does that get assumed by like a next generation? If there's not a mortgage, do you see folks doing reverse mortgages, things like that? From a real estate investing standpoint, I'm a big proponent of leverage when used correctly. Obviously, some people use leverage incorrectly, but what does the mortgage side of things look like for you?
Well, there's a lot of different options for a lot of different people. But you're right. Several years ago, I think that reverse mortgages became very, very popular. I right now have a client who, she and her husband did a reverse mortgage. Right now there's a bunch of title issues and it's become litigation. And again, the whole idea behind the reverse mortgages is, okay, we don't have to worry about too terribly. To me, and again, talking about investing, it's an investment from the mortgage company. They're hoping that you're going to get this mortgage. You're not going to use much of it, or they're going to cap out of it, that the value of your house is going to be more than the mortgage amount.
Sure.
Unfortunately, these mortgage companies have run into the situation where their bet was that the person wouldn't live quite so long.
Yep.
And now the lien on these properties
Exceeds the value of the property.
The value of the house.
Wow.
So what happened quite often all across Pennsylvania, in fact, probably all across the country, is that these mortgage companies are left holding a piece of property what the family wants nothing to do with because they're not getting $1 from it.
Sure.
So some mortgage companies have approached me to say, how do we basically get this process going? Because we've got a piece of property that's still in the name of the deceased people. We've got this huge lien out there. We need a mechanism that allows us to get at least part of our debt paid. But nobody in the family has opened up an estate. So I've come up with a protocol in my office. I contact all of the heirs and I say, would you like to participate in this? We know that there's nothing in it for you, but this property is still sitting out there in your parents' names, and we need to get it out of your parents' names. So quite often, the misconception is that under these reverse mortgages, that magically the mortgage company now owns the property.
Right.
And that's just not the case.
Yeah, it
the
doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
there's a process that needs to play itself out.
There's a process, okay?
Yeah.
They can either go through a mortgage foreclosure, which is a long process, and it's not necessarily going to save you any money. So what the mortgage companies have asked me to do, and we've done it quite successfully, is I contact the heirs. I try to get the heirs to participate, which means that they'll sign a renunciation because the mortgage company is a creditor. The creditor can actually open up an estate. You don't have to be the heir. So the creditor then appoints me as their agent. I go and open up an estate. I become the administrator as well as the attorney. So I then, as soon as I become the administrator, we can market the property. We can get it sold. And then part of my job, because it's part of the rules that we have to follow, is I immediately file an inheritance tax return. Because again, even if it's an insolvent estate, you have to do an inheritance tax return. Otherwise, a new buyer is going to say there's a lien out there that we don't know what the tax is. So we file an inheritance tax return for an insolvent piece of property. And what I've found in my practice is there's a lot of investors out there that want to buy these properties because they're great. They might have been great properties. They, unfortunately, because of the pandemic and because of maybe some mismanagement with a lot of these reverse mortgage companies, these properties have been sitting since 19, 20, 21. The people have died several years ago, and these properties have been sitting for a long time. And they've been paying the taxes, and they're probably not going to get their amount of money that they've put into them, but you can clean up these properties and you can get them back onto the tax rolls and get some new people in there, whether it's renters or owners. And there's a lot of investors out there looking to gobble up these properties. Once we can get clear title. And that's what I'm doing. I'm getting clear title. I, as the administrator, become the authority allowed to pass title to a new buyer. And I, of course, make sure that the inheritance tax return is filed so that we get that nice little document back from the Department of State that says, insolvent estate, no tax due. And that's the golden ticket there.
That's the key. Yeah, that's so fascinating. And to your point, really an interesting opportunity for investors, something for our listeners to be thinking about. First of all, that's great practical advice for the homeowner, the person who's got the asset, and also really an opportunity in the investing space. And I find that that's often the case as I think about the impact of our investments from your standpoint. At least if it's that primary residence, the sort of the smallest impact is, hey, let's save on some taxes. But the largest impact is these bigger issues that can really arise where that asset can become a fraction of the value of that asset that it could have been worth had it been managed a little bit differently. So I think just as we think about our assets and as we think about planning ahead, there's just such an opportunity there to be thoughtful. And so I think you've given some great practical advice to our listeners to be thoughtful about that process. So thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Like I said, we always try to come up with innovative ways. So again, one idea is you may have some individuals on your street that you see that are aging, and maybe they have children, maybe they don't have children, but you might even want to approach them and say, listen, there might be a way for someone to purchase those properties now, and then let that person rent that property back. Again, it's all taken care of ahead of time. The person doesn't have to leave their home. It's right on your street. You might, you won't ever see that particular piece of property deteriorate because of, like you said, mismanagement of that asset as the person ages.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your wisdom. We're going to jump into what we call the lightning round. So we got to know you professionally. We've gotten some wisdom as it relates to estate planning. Now we want to get to know you personally a little bit. So first question for you, what would you consider your biggest win? It could be personal, it could be professional, but biggest win in your lifetime?
Well, I believe that a win is perhaps more along the lines of a settlement, okay? You've probably heard the term that when you have a settlement, everybody walks away a little unhappy.
Yep.
That it's over with. I think in my career, I've been able to create a scenario where we've been able to resolve a situation, whether it was a car wreck, whether it was an industrial accident, whether it was a workers' compensation situation where you've got multiple insurance companies and things like that, and you've got disabled folks. The win is getting enough asset funds, whatever it is, whether it's a structured settlement or whether it's cash, something so that that person can walk away and be done with the litigation, because most people want to be done with litigation.
Sure.
So when I say a win, that's a win, because you roll the dice, you go to trial, you may
You
not
never
win.
know. Yeah.
I mean, I was lucky enough, one of my very, very first trials, I actually won.
Wow.
It was unheard of.
Yeah.
It's down in Greene County, and just a brand new lawyer. And I actually won money for someone who got injured. And people said, I can't believe it. So it's winning comes in a lot of different forms.
Yeah.
So if I can resolve something without having the stress of going to trial, that's probably a better win.
Yeah, I know. I love the way you reframed it as not just a win for you, but a win for both parties, right? It's this win-win. It might feel a little bit like both parties lost, but in the settlement world, that's how you know that you've got a good deal, right? Everybody walks away a little unhappy.
Right.
Okay, how about favorite food? What's a favorite food of yours?
Well, my last name is Bodnar. I'm Hungarian and I'm Slovak. So I would say almost any ethnic food would be my favorite food.
Nice.
So
Can you get that here in Pittsburgh anywhere?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If not in your grandmother's kitchen, there's several wonderful restaurants around that you can get good ethnic food. And then again, any ethnic food, whether it's Italian or Chinese, any kind of ethnic food is a great food. So,
Yeah.
But yes, pierogies would probably be up there on the list. My family does a special Christmas Eve meal. It's a no meat, no milk meal.
Yeah.
And the only cheat that we do is we have some pierogies, and they do have a little bit of butter in them.
Oh, nice.
So-
That sounds like a fair cheat, though. That should be allowed. Do you do no fish as well in terms of no
we
meat?
do fish. We
Okay.
do fish.
So similar to the Italian.
Right, the seven fishes.
Seven fishes thing. That's what we do in our family.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, ours is called Valia.
Oh.
And it's, like I said, it's 12 different dishes that you can forage the fields for, essentially, or forage the woods for, and you can make a feast.
yeah.
So
Very cool. That's a neat tradition. How about a favorite movie? Do you like any particular movies?
I love lots of movies, but one of my favorites has always been the old version of Overboard with Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell, and it's such a cute movie. So it's a great movie.
I haven't seen that. I'll have to check it out.
You have to watch it whenever it comes on any channel, no matter at what stage of the movie is. You got to stop and watch it because it's such a cute movie.
Love that. Thanks for the suggestion. Any A+ content you're taking in these days? Like how do you hone your craft? How do you continue to learn? What's some good content that you're absorbing?
I'm very lucky in that the Allegheny County Bar Association, I'm a very active member of that. They really try to promote a lot of content or a lot of opportunities for anybody who belongs to the Allegheny County Bar Association. Do a lot of continuing legal education, do a lot of networking, do a lot of fun things. There's lots of organizations here in Pittsburgh. Just went to one week or so back, again, about transitioning your business either to your children or selling your business. So there's lots of ways to be on top of what's very important to my consumer, which is pretty much anybody.
Yeah,
anybody
sure.
with anybody out there could be my consumer. Because like I said, I'm cradle to grave, whether you're in a car wreck, whether you have a parent, whether you have some land in Florida. And again, because of my unique situation being both in Pennsylvania and Florida, I have to keep up on both what's happening in Florida as well as what's happening in Pennsylvania. So it lends itself to a lot of continuing legal education and a lot of reading, a lot of anytime I have downtime, I'm reading.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Well, I'm sure that's a great way to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the industry. Last question, how can folks get in contact with you if they want to reach out to you about your services?
Well, I have a phone number that I've had for 30 years. It's 412-804-4048. I have an email address that I've probably had for 25 years. It's ATTY, so an abbreviation for attorney, at symbol, KA, my first initial, my middle initial, Bodnar, BODNAR.com. I have a website, which is www.kabodnar.com. And there is a little way that if you find my website and you want to send out a query to me, you can do that as well. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on everything like that. But I have to tell you that probably the quickest way to get a hold of me would be to send me an email or to give me a phone call. I do my best to answer my phone myself. And if I'm not there, it rolls over and I listen to every message that comes in. So, and it's been my pleasure to be here today, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for being on the show, Kim. It's been great to learn a little bit about estate planning and some of the intricacies about how to protect the assets that we've built and how to really think ahead, how to be thinking about preserving and even thinking about the tax implications when we're no longer here. So thanks for being on the show. Thanks to our listeners for listening in, and we'll see y'all next time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Real Returns Podcast. We hope that you learned something new about how you can invest to make a lasting impact on those around you. Please be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts, leave us a review, and share about us on social media. We hope you will join us for our next episode, where we will be continuing the conversation around impactful real estate investing.